Have you ever been blamed for something so unfair that your body goes numb before your brain even catches up? Because when my boss smiled confidently and said, "This wasn't my decision," I realized she had already decided I was disposable. What she didn't know was that she'd left fingerprints everywhere. If you've ever been underestimated, silenced, or quietly pushed under the bus at work, this story is for you. Like the video, subscribe, and listen carefully, because sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't loud. It's documented. I wasn't new. That's important to understand. I wasn't some intern trying to prove myself, or someone who didn't know how things worked. I had a reputation, a good one. I was the person managers trusted when something complicated needed to be explained clearly without wasting people's time. The kind of employee who doesn't need praise because the work speaks for itself. So when I was assigned to build an online training module for the finance department, I didn't panic, I didn't rush, I didn't cut corners. I treated it like every other project, carefully, methodically, professionally. The goal was simple on paper. Existing users, new process. 30 minutes, interactive elements. Realistic scenarios, a few quizzes to reinforce learning. Nothing flashy. Nothing dumbed down, just clean, efficient training for people who already knew what they were doing. And that part mattered because this wasn't a beginner audience. These were finance professionals. People who lived inside our systems. People who handled sensitive data daily. People who had already gone through weeks of classroom instruction before this module ever landed on their screen, in other words. This was polish, not primer. I worked closely with the subject matter experts. Smart people, busy people. People whose calendars were packed weeks in advance. They trusted me to translate their notes into something usable. Something respectful of their time. And I did exactly that. The first draft wasn't perfect, it never is. But it was solid, logical, focused, and most importantly, appropriate. Then it went out for review. That's when she entered the picture. The new associate director. She was new enough to still introduce herself in meetings with a rehearsed confidence. You know the type, shoulders back, voice firm. Eyes scanning the room to make sure people are paying attention. She hadn't earned authority yet, but she wore it. Her background wasn't finance, it wasn't systems. It wasn't even adult professional training. She came from education, middle school level. And she carried that mindset into everything she touched. At first, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. New leadership always wants to leave a mark. That's normal. Sometimes they overcorrect. Sometimes they push too hard. You adapt. Then I opened her feedback. Page after page after page. Not suggestions, accusations. She said the module was confusing. She said it lacked foundational explanations. She questioned why certain steps weren't explained in microscopic detail. She asked why we didn't explain what buttons were. Why we didn't explain basic navigation. Why we assumed users knew things they had literally been trained on for years. And as I read it, something clicked. This wasn't about improvement. This was about control. The feedback wasn't written for the audience. It was written from her perspective. From someone who didn't understand the system. Didn't understand the users. And didn't understand the context. But refused to accept that maybe she wasn't the target audience. I responded carefully. Politely. Professionally. I explained more than once that this training wasn't designed for beginners. That adding basic explanations would expand the scope beyond what was approved. That finance users didn't need to be taught how to open Outlook or configure a network drive. Her response was cold. She didn't argue. She didn't discuss. She dismissed. This needs to be accessible to everyone. We can't assume prior knowledge. This is not acceptable in its current form. That's when the realization hit me, not sharply, but slowly, like a weight settling in my chest. She wasn't going to budge. And because of her title, she didn't have to. So I forwarded her feedback to the subject matter experts. The reaction was immediate disbelief. They thought it was satire. One of them actually said, "Is this some kind of test?" I didn't say anything. I just sent the original email. The silence after that was heavy. Meetings followed. Long ones. Painful ones. Meetings where highly trained professionals were forced to justify why a training module about a new finance process didn't include instructions on how to use a computer. I watched frustration creep across their faces. I felt it in my own jaw, permanently clenched. Every addition she demanded meant more work, more recordings, more approvals, more wasted hours. And still, we complied. Because that's what you do when someone above you decides to make a point using your time. Weeks passed. The module grew. And grew. And grew. What was supposed to be 30 minutes became an overstuffed monster, bloated with irrelevant content, clogged with unnecessary explanations, weighed down by things that had nothing to do with the original goal. And then, after everything was rewritten, re-recorded, and resubmitted, she disappeared. No approval. No rejection. No feedback. Just silence. And that's when the finance director started asking why a simple training module was nearly a month late. That's when I went looking for my paper trail. And that's when I realized someone had been cleaning up behind themselves. When I went digging through my inbox and sent items, there was a strange silence in my digital world. Every email that had once been a clear record of her absurd demands was gone. At first, I tried to convince myself it was a mistake. Maybe something got deleted by accident. Or perhaps I had misfiled a folder during some late-night cleanup. But the more I searched, the more the truth became undeniable. This was no accident. Every single email that contained her exact criticisms, the ones that proved how unreasonable she had been, had vanished. The inbox, sent items, deleted items, everything wiped clean. As if someone had gone through with meticulous precision to erase every trace. My stomach sank. My pulse raced. A creeping, cold panic started to crawl up my spine. Because I knew instantly that this wasn't ordinary office chaos, it was sabotage. I reached out to one of my friends in IT. Someone I trusted completely. And explained what had happened. Their eyes widened when I described the situation. And I could hear the subtle excitement in their voice, the kind only people who deal with digital mysteries can feel. They started asking questions. Methodically, probing the timing, the content, the specifics. After some digging, we discovered something unbelievable. A week ago, a compliance delete had been run on the Exchange server. A function usually reserved for eliminating spam or harmful phishing emails. But in this case, it wasn't random. It had been triggered specifically for the exact phrase she had used in her feedback. Every email with that phrase, gone. My proof, my defense. My record of her unreasonable behavior, obliterated in one silent sweep. For a moment, I felt completely powerless. I remembered that cold tightness in my chest from before. That sense of injustice that had been gnawing at me for weeks. And now it was amplified tenfold. But then a spark ignited. My IT friend, almost grinning, said, "We might be able to recover this." And with that, we began the painstaking process of piecing together every shred of evidence. Deleted emails were restored, saved onto a flash drive, and carefully duplicated. Every time an email from her landed in my inbox, even the ones unrelated to the module, I saved it. Every subject matter expert involved was instructed to do the same. We were building a secret, offline evidence locker, slowly but surely. As we worked, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: frustration, disbelief, but also a growing, quiet satisfaction. Here was someone who thought they could erase their mistakes and pin them on me. And yet, unknowingly, they were leaving a trail for me to follow. I replayed countless moments in my head: the subtle condescension, the relentless critiques that made simple tasks feel like mountains, and the silence after I delivered the revisions. She thought she had control, but in reality, she had just exposed herself, piece by piece. Over the next several weeks, I meticulously documented everything. Every absurd demand, every irrelevant addition she forced into the training module, every email chain where her tone was impossibly condescending, all saved. That's when I realized the stakes had shifted. This wasn't just a battle over a training module anymore. This was about exposing the deliberate attempt to manipulate and erase evidence, and proving that her narrative, that I had somehow overstepped, was a lie. Every painstaking week of following her impossible directions had been laying the groundwork for something much bigger than a mere work dispute. And the deeper I dug, the clearer it became that the only person who could lose more than me was her. I could feel a slow-burning anticipation building, a mix of vindication and the almost cinematic satisfaction of knowing that the person trying to ruin me had left a trail I was about to follow with lethal precision. By the end of those weeks, I wasn't just frustrated anymore. I was ready. Ready to confront the chaos she had created. Ready to show the world what had actually happened, and most importantly, ready to let the evidence speak louder than her carefully curated silence ever could. The module might have been bloated. The emails might have been deleted, but in my hands, the truth was back, and I was just getting started. After weeks of navigating her relentless demands, meticulously documenting every absurd email, and rebuilding what should have been a straightforward module, I finally submitted the finished product. The module, now bloated and rambling with 3 hours of content that should have taken 30 minutes, went to the finance director for review. I watched my inbox obsessively, waiting for her response. And as usual, she didn't reply. Silence. A void that was heavy, suffocating, and infuriating. It wasn't just the missing approval that gnawed at me. It was the realization that she thought ignoring the project would absolve her responsibility. That by not engaging, she could leave me holding the bag when the inevitable complaints came. I tried to focus on what I could control. Every email she had sent me, every directive she had issued, every unreasonable demand she had made, all saved on that flash drive, perfectly preserved. I kept imagining her smugly thinking she had erased the evidence of her overreach. But now, she had unknowingly set the stage for her own downfall. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every obsessive correction she had demanded, every irrelevant inclusion, had been recorded, time-stamped, and catalogued. The digital trail she believed she had wiped clean was in my hands. Immutable, ready to speak the truth. Then came the call from the finance director. He wanted a meeting. He was concerned, puzzled, and, finally, invested. He asked why the module was so delayed, and why it had grown far beyond its original scope. I forwarded the final version, watched him skim through the excessive content, and I could see the disbelief in his eyes. He had no idea how the module had ballooned into something so convoluted. The meeting arrived. I walked into the conference room with a mixture of apprehension and quiet confidence. The associate director was there. Naturally, seated in a posture that said, "I am untouchable." As if her title alone could shield her from scrutiny. She opened her mouth, ready to pivot, ready to redirect blame. She tried to act like she had made just a few minor suggestions, painting me as the person who had taken her comments and run wild. I felt my stomach tighten, the old familiar heat of anger creeping up my spine. But this time, I didn't flinch. The finance director began by asking her to explain the module. She started cautiously, stumbling over details she clearly didn't understand. That was my cue. Calmly, I pulled out my flash drive, opened the carefully preserved emails, and began to show the evidence. Every unreasonable demand. Every critique that had forced us to expand the module beyond all reason. Every email she had hoped would disappear, laid bare in chronological order. I narrated the timeline, showing exactly how she had escalated demands. How she had insisted on unnecessary tangents. How she had disappeared and left the project in limbo, and finally, how she had attempted to delete her digital footprint. Her face shifted. I could see the color drain, the confidence faltering. The words she had once wielded as a shield became a trap around her own neck. She tried to interject, to argue. To claim that I had somehow overstepped. That perhaps I had implemented the wrong version. But the finance director, finally seeing through the fog, muted her. He wanted the truth. And I gave it. Every detail, every piece of preserved evidence. Every time-stamped email showing her instructions, every absurd request. There was no ambiguity. No, he said, she said. Just cold, undeniable proof. She abruptly left the meeting, muttering excuses. Disappearing from the digital room as if the earth had swallowed her whole. I sat there, breathing steadily. Feeling a mix of relief and vindication that was almost physical. Every week of frustration, every moment of silent anger. Every internal argument I had had about whether I was imagining things, all of it had led to this. She had tried to erase her mistakes. To manipulate the narrative. To protect herself at my expense. And yet, she had done exactly what I had predicted. She left a trail, and I followed it to perfection. The finance director turned to me afterward and asked for copies of all relevant files. I handed them over, calmly explaining that these might not exist for long. If someone else tried to intervene, I detailed the compliance delete, how it had been misused, and how we had recovered the evidence. His eyes widened as he absorbed the scope of what had happened. That single conversation triggered a chain reaction behind the scenes. I didn't need to know all the details, but I could feel it. Things were about to move in a direction she could not control. For the first time in weeks, I felt the shift. I wasn't just surviving the chaos she created. I was beginning to see it unravel around her. The days after that meeting were surreal. It was as if the air in the office had shifted. Charged with tension that you could almost feel pressing against your chest. The associate director, who had once carried herself with such unshakable confidence, vanished from communication entirely. No emails, no instant messages, no casual check-ins. It was eerie. Watching someone so used to wielding authority suddenly retreat into silence. Meanwhile, the finance director had taken my warnings seriously. He asked for every single file, every email, every saved copy of the module, and promised to escalate the situation appropriately. I had no idea exactly what would happen next, but I knew one thing. The pieces I had been meticulously collecting were about to play out in ways she never imagined. Almost immediately. Whispers began to circulate through the higher levels of leadership. There were private inquiries, requests for statements from past colleagues, and subtle digs into her previous projects. The company's information security and audit teams got involved quietly, trying to figure out if there had been any other instances of tampering, any further attempts to manipulate or destroy evidence. My friends in IT, those who had helped me recover the deleted emails, were suddenly in meetings of their own, being grilled about what had been done, who had access, and whether any protocol violations had occurred. The whole thing was a slow, unfolding avalanche. And the associate director was at the epicenter, completely unprepared for the magnitude of what she had triggered. And then the personal details started creeping into the corporate narrative. Through the usual channels of office gossip, rumors began to surface. She had been involved with one of the IT managers, the very person responsible for running the compliance delete that had wiped her emails. My stomach tightened at first, a mix of disbelief and grim satisfaction. Because suddenly the story wasn't just about a module gone wrong. It was about the undeniable collision of professional misconduct and personal entanglement. Every email she had thought she erased, every attempt she made to protect herself by deleting records, was now connected to a scandal that no one could ignore. Within a week, the dominoes began to fall. Leadership quietly announced that she and the IT manager had left the company to pursue new opportunities. The kind of corporate euphemism that barely conceals disaster. In reality, it was clear that their departures were forced. A combination of professional failure, ethical violations, and now personal indiscretions. Even without official confirmation, the rumor mill did its work, and within days, the story had spread further than I could have imagined. Colleagues whispered about her downfall, her attempts to manipulate the project, the compliance delete, and the 3-hour monstrosity of a module that had become a testament to her hubris. The very project she had tried to weaponize against me had turned into the evidence that brought her career crashing down. Meanwhile, I had time to reflect. Every late night I spent documenting emails. Every frustrating re-recording session. Every moment of simmering anger, none of it had been wasted. What had begun as an exercise in survival had turned into a carefully orchestrated form of justice. I didn't revel in her misfortune. I simply understood the elegance of cause and effect. She had tried to erase history, and in doing so, had set the stage for its exposure. Her arrogance, her entitlement, her attempts to silence me, all had backfired spectacularly. In the quiet moments, I allowed myself a small, private satisfaction. There is a peculiar weightlessness that comes from knowing you have documented the truth so thoroughly that it cannot be denied. I had watched chaos unfold for weeks, but now the tide was turning. The module, the emails, the deleted messages, all of it had become my weapon. Precise and irrefutable. By the time the official audits concluded, the atmosphere in the office was almost electric. The associate director and the IT manager were out. Leadership had to acknowledge the mishandling of processes and the breach of professional conduct. The finance director personally commended me for my meticulous record keeping and for presenting the evidence in such a clear, undeniable way. There was a sense of closure, not just professionally, but emotionally. The weeks of stress, the tension, the frustration at being manipulated, had all led to a vindication so complete it almost felt cinematic. And yet, it wasn't over completely. Outside of official announcements, the fallout continued quietly. Rumors of divorces, professional reputations shattered. Colleagues in disbelief, every ripple confirmed the depth of the consequences triggered by her own actions. It was then, in that charged calm after the storm, that I realized the full arc of what had happened. She had attempted a grand entrance, trying to establish authority, to control, to create a masterpiece in her own eyes. But instead of a grand entrance, she orchestrated a grand faceplant. She had tried to manipulate, intimidate, and erase evidence, all while leaving herself completely exposed. Every attempt to save face only made her exposure more total. The quiet satisfaction I felt wasn't gloating. It was acknowledgement of a principle that had been affirmed. Truth, documentation, and patience can topple arrogance in ways that immediate confrontation cannot. And I had played it exactly right. The day it all came to a head felt almost surreal. I was in my office, going over some final notes on unrelated tasks, when the finance director called me into another meeting. Unlike previous encounters, this one carried an air of finality. The associate director was present, but noticeably tense. Her usual posture of forced confidence replaced by stiffness, hesitation, and the unmistakable unease of someone who knows the walls are closing in. She tried, predictably, to salvage control, offering excuses, claiming that any mistakes were the result of miscommunication or mismanagement, subtly attempting to redirect blame toward me. But this time, the room was prepared. The evidence undeniable, and the silence in response to her claims weighed heavier than any argument she could offer. I took a deep breath and calmly presented the timeline. I walked them through the original module, the first round of feedback, and every absurd, micromanaging request she had made. I showed the emails recovered from the compliance delete, each one time-stamped, each one clearly illustrating her insistence on irrelevant additions, her disappearance during critical review periods, and her attempts to erase the digital trail. Every word, every directive, every absurd demand was laid bare in chronological order. The room went quiet, the weight of the evidence settling over everyone like a physical presence. For the first time, her attempts at manipulation were powerless. There was no arguing with facts. There was no twisting the story. The narrative she had tried to control was now out of her hands. Her reaction was instantaneous and visceral. The color drained from her face, her voice faltered, and she attempted to interject. But the finance director finally muted her, giving me uninterrupted space to narrate the truth. Each detail I revealed, each piece of the puzzle I laid out, added another brick to the wall closing in around her. She realized that the very tools she had tried to weaponize, emails, project control, authority, were now the instruments of her downfall. I could feel the tension in the room, the sharp, almost cinematic satisfaction of watching someone forced to confront the consequences of their arrogance. It wasn't vindictiveness. It was justice executed methodically, patiently, and perfectly. By the time the meeting ended, she abruptly left the room, muttering something about needing to handle personal matters, and never logged back on. The finance director asked me to provide all relevant files, which I did, calmly explaining that some items might be erased if anyone attempted to interfere. Shortly thereafter, the company conducted a full internal audit, reaching into past projects, interviewing former colleagues, and reviewing processes that had been manipulated. The audit revealed the extent of her misuse of authority and the unauthorized compliance delete conducted by the IT manager she had been involved with. The result was predictable yet satisfying. Both the associate director and the IT manager were forced to leave the company, under the guise of pursuing new opportunities. Rumors circulated quickly, revealing personal indiscretions and professional missteps that left their reputations irreparably damaged. It was a complete unraveling, triggered by the very arrogance and manipulation that had caused So much chaos in the first place. As the dust settled, I finally allowed myself a deep exhale. Weeks of frustration, sleepless nights, and simmering anger had led to this moment of clarity and resolution. I reflected on what had happened, not with gloating, but with an understanding of the delicate balance between patience, preparation, and the pursuit of truth. She had tried to erase history, manipulate the narrative, and destroy my credibility, but in doing so, she exposed herself completely. The moral of the story was unmistakable. Careful documentation, patience, and meticulous attention to detail can triumph over arrogance, deceit, and abuse of power in ways that immediate confrontation cannot. Looking back, I realized this story was not just about revenge, it was about justice. It was about the quiet satisfaction of knowing that truth, when preserved and presented, has a power that manipulation cannot overcome. I had endured frustration, been underestimated, and pushed to my limits. But the payoff was absolute. The lesson was clear. Patience, careful planning, and unwavering adherence to facts can turn the tables on anyone who tries to undermine you. And as I returned to my normal work, the knowledge that I had survived, documented, and ultimately exposed the truth brought a calm, enduring sense of triumph. So if this story resonated with you, if it gave you the chill of seeing someone finally get what they deserve, hit that like button. Share your thoughts in the comments about the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed. And of course, subscribe for more stories that prove patience, perseverance, and truth can prevail over arrogance and deceit. Sometimes the quiet, methodical path is the most devastatingly effective. And in this case, it was flawless.